pants, and I'm like,
we started. Wait for it.
yeah. Well, I mean, our audience will probably want to hear about Stabby's pants catastrophe.
The people have a right to know.
This is married life, man. You know, like stuff that you're like when you're young, you're like, oh, that's gross. I don't want to do that, and you're like, oh, this is. Then you become married, and these situations happen. You're like, why is this normal? Why have I normalized this shit? You know.
All right, and with that being said,
okay, I'll get you some pants, I guess. Pants.
Hey, all you crazy sci-fi and fantasy fans, it's time for your daily dose of shenanigans over here at the Blasters and Blades podcast. Just a couple of nerdy veterans and one chaos coordinator geeking out over our science fiction passions.
Putting on her pants.
A place where magic is king, the sky is the limit, and space is the place, and pants are optional. We are the podcast that puts the fun in dysfunction. So without further ado,
I haven't worn pants since 2022. I mean, like every podcast, I'm like Winnie the Pooh. I got a T-shirt, and that's it.
Yeah. Thanks for sharing, and we're going to move on, and we're going to let our guests introduce themselves. We have Miss Jena.
This is why I drink, JR. This is why I drink.
Jana, tell us about yourself. Save us from the pants discussion.
Hi, guys. I'm Jana S Brown. I write under Jena Rey as well. Jena Rey writes urban fantasy, science fiction fantasy, and other things that are creepy.
And her books are awesome.
Thank you. I really like them. And I write about vampire hunters. So I'm happy to be here to talk about what we're going to do to get rid of them.
I have not read any of your vampire hunter stuff, so
it's
coming out. Hook a dude up.
So
it's new.
It's new.
Okay, cool.
We'll get into that. It's old new. There's some of it out there already, and there's new stuff coming.
Let me know when that happens.
We'll have you back to talk about that.
Definitely want to read that.
All right, next we have Mr. Jesse James Fain.
Probably because
hey everybody, I'm Jesse James Fain. I write science fiction and fantasy and mill sci-fi and pretty much anything else that involves a fight and someone seeking revenge. I do specialize in revenge tales and things that have as much combat kind of as possible. I am currently working on a Monster Hunter that will hopefully be out by the end of the year. Vampires may or may not be involved. I won't spoil those things, but that will be my first foray into the world of creature hunting.
Oh, all righty. Last but certainly not least, we have Mr. Nathan Abrahams.
Oh, was Nick's introduction the pants rant?
It was, but it's okay.
I have many rants. You'll also find that I die on a lot of hills. Welcome to the show.
So I'm Nathan Abrahams. I haven't written a whole lot yet, but I have been published, so it counts. I do want to clarify, I'm not a veteran, but I was a cog in the military-industrial complex for about 8 years, building parts for the Abrams, for the F-18 Hornet, for a couple of carriers and submarines.
Did you do anything for the Bradley?
I did not do anything for the Bradley, but I've heard that the armor can be penned with a toaster strudel.
What a shit machine that is. But it's very effective, fun to operate. So, like, you get for not doing that. The Abrams is a fine instrument of death. I fired that thing many a time.
I built one of the stator cores that was involved in the turret rotation assembly, I think. So that works. That was my.
As long as it's not a Bradley.
No, never touched the Bradley.
The Bradley was designed by a woman for people that have small hands, and I don't have small hands despite my size. And I got what we called Bradley bites all the time. Trying to go in there and mix with the coax and all that stuff. It like tore skin. Like,
I mean, it could have been worse. Have you ever seen the interior of an M50 Ontos?
Yes.
So I primarily write Weird West and some Sword and Planet. Although at the moment, at the insistence of one of my publishers and my wife, I'm writing some alternate history involving the aftermath of World War II. So yeah.
Are any of the themes if Hitler got a skateboard when he was younger?
No, the theme is what if Patton resigned his commission and found another way to fight the commies?
Oh. You've just played
punch
me.
a
That's a
commie.
very
Everyone
interesting
punches
question.
Nazis, and the commies don't get enough love. I'm just saying, why can't they?
What about MacArthur? Like, what happened to MacArthur during that time? Is he okay?
Oh well, so MacArthur's fine. But MacArthur doesn't really deviate from his original path. I actually just finished writing the intro, and it's a conversation between the two of them in the officers' quarters of the Missouri.
Ah, Jesus, that sounds really interesting. Actually, I'm a World War II buff because that's what you do when you get over 30. You either get really into World War II or smoked meats, and I chose World War II.
A wise choice.
You and me both.
And smoked meats.
And smoked meats and assorted bourbons, which I also love.
But okay, so apparently I'm being too soft, and I don't know why that is because I've got everything maxed out like normal. But
sounds fine to me.
Oh, absolutely. Then it's just Jana. So in your alternate history world, before we get back on topic, because I'm curious, did you let Patton live or does he still die?
Oh no, he lives. That's where the divergence happens. Before he gets hit by a runaway wagon, he gets fed up with trying to administer Germany and resigns his commission and goes tries to handle things his own way because he doesn't feel the war is properly over.
That's a good way to do it. All right, I can't wait to read it, and when it publishes, you have to come back and talk about it. Much like Jana's going to come back and talk about her vampire hunters.
Yeah, both.
But Nathan, this is your first time on the show, so this is your first time on the show. So Nick, hush. This is your first time on the show, so we have to ask you the religion questions. Are you ready for this?
I believe so.
All right. Star Wars, Star Trek, or Firefly?
I'm going to go with Firefly because that's the last time that I feel that Joss Whedon's snark was actually still funny. And he also found himself able to turn it off when necessary. Once he started writing for Marvel and they adopted his style, they never found time for an off switch. There were moments in Firefly where he could dial it back a little and let some of the moments have, a little bit of weight to him, but he just lost that ability at some point.
I don't know. There's a lot of Joss in Age of Ultron that was snarky and funny, and he got James Spader to play Ultron, and he let loose. That's one of my favorite Avengers movies is Age of Ultron.
I do love to watch James Spader just gnaw on the scenery.
Oh, he did such a good job. He was like my villain growing up in the 80s. Like he was the villain in every 80s John Hughes type movie, and it just let him unleash on Age of Ultron in full villainy was just amazing to watch.
All right. And because we're polytheistic here at the Blasters and Blades podcast, Game of Thrones, The Wheel of Time, or Chronicles of Narnia?
I'm going to go with Chronicles of Narnia because I'm really kind of tired of George R.R. Martin struggling his very hardest to die of chicken overdose before he finishes writing more Dany fanfic. I'm just not really interested anymore. And I tried to read Wheel of Time. A really good friend of mine growing up recommended it. And I don't think I finished the first chapter. I said, nope. Like I can read the Silmarillion. I grew up with the King James Bible, could not cut my way through Wheel of Time. So I just didn't.
I'd rather read the Catholic Bible than Wheel of Time.
I'm sure Jesus likes that answer. But with that being said, what is your favorite dinosaur?
Dimorphodon.
Oh, no one said that one.
That's a new one.
We're gonna have to look that one up after the show because I don't think I know that.
Log that because that's a new one.
So tell us about the Dimorphodon and why is it your favorite?
Well, Dimorphodon's my favorite because I'm sure you guys have heard of a game called Ark. It's terribly optimized. It takes up about 500 gigs on your hard drive, but it lets you tame dinosaurs.
Huge, yes.
One of the dinosaurs you can tame is the Dimorphodon. Now, if you're playing competitive PvP, first off, how do you afford that much Ritalin? And secondly, just don't. The Chinese will cheat and win anyways. So don't do that. And if you do that, the Dimorphodon...
I choose bourbon.
So if you're playing competitive, I don't think the Dimorphodon serves much purpose. But it's really fun if you're just playing casually to just have a Dimorphodon sitting on your shoulder and you can send it out to attack things like a falcon is really cool.
Oh, so it looks almost like a pterodactyl. I just did a quick Google image search.
They're just really small, got a big giant head. It's theorized they probably didn't really fly that well. They're probably more gliders, but who knows? Most paleontology is guessing anyway.
Absolutely. All right. And because we are civilized human beings here at the Bastards and Blades podcast and no longer knuckle-dragging troglodytes, coffee or tea, and how do you take it?
I don't drink caffeine.
What? Is that why they wouldn't let you in the military?
That could be, although that was probably more due to the cardiac issues and the chronic migraines.
Caffeine would definitely affect that, yes.
I don't know how I would live. Like, I've almost got probably as much coffee in my bloodstream as I do blood.
JR, you don't have a bloodstream system. You have a coffee stream system. There's some
Pretty
blood.
much.
And see, conversely, I've always been mystified by people who insist that they cannot function without chemical stimulus.
Oh, I'm a living example of that, sir.
Because I work in education and people come in, I'm like, oh man, I gotta have my Starbucks or I just can't do anything. I'm like, how? I function normally all day, every day. How do you not function without Starbucks? I don't get it.
Starbucks is overpriced, burnt beans. There is better. I mean, even Dunkin' is better.
America runs on Dunkin'. Wait a minute.
I've heard that. They bought a civic center in my home state. I think it was a civic center.
All right. Well, now that we got that out of the way, America. Yeah, I've been digging their coffee.
I told you I had a banner for it.
I need to figure out how to make their cold brew, so I can save money because I'm falling in love with this iced beverage.
Cold brew's good.
You and I are going to have a talk on the after show. Figure out some solutions.
Talk to Stabby because she's done the research.
So speaking of coffee, Stabby, you've been doing all your research for the coffee brand this week. What are you drinking?
I am currently drinking bourbon flavored coffee brand coffee with peppermint mocha creamer.
Any real bourbon added to it for effect, for authenticity?
No, that's Nick's job.
All right, and with that being said,
I like my coffee to taste like coffee, not like booze. If I would just wanted it to taste like booze, then I would just drink booze. I mean, it's not like I leave the house.
She doesn't want the bean water flavor to be adulterated by.
That's where I come.
I need my bean water to taste like bean water.
All right, and speaking of tasting, well, that's a horrible segue. We're just going to move on, and today's topic is.
I heard it called bean broth today.
Wait, bean broth? I like this.
Bean broth.
Tell me more.
I sent it to you on the Instagram, and I know for a fact you don't check when I send you things because I sent it to you because it's freaking hilarious. But they called it bean broth, and that killed me. I was like, no, not bean water anymore. It is bean broth from now on.
I just have been avoiding as much social media as I can because I am trying to get my word count up in spite of school being out for the summer and kids wanting attention and food and all this weird stuff.
Me sending you all the shit I'm 3D printing.
I mean, that's important too. All right, so before we start talking about vampire hunters, the topic that brought us here, we are first going to let you see a picture of the Dimorphodon.
Hey!
That thing's cool.
Some of the pictures show it with feathers, and some of it shows it without feathers. So I guess it just depends.
That's a gun.
That's a vampire
that's the
hunting
vampire
kit.
All right.
But yeah. Sometimes
with that out of the way, so first, the first step of all these panel chats is define our terms. I think vampire hunter is the first one that's actually generally pretty easy. It's one that hunts vampires. So
hold on, you can't use a word in its own definition.
One that hunts the blood-sucking undead.
There you go.
Better. Still use hunt, but not hunter. So we can go with that
one. One that seeks out and kills the blood-sucking undead.
It's semantics. Jesus Christ. We all know what we're talking about.
we have to define our terms, sir. It is a requirement of a panel chat.
If you don't know what a vampire is, you need a definition of terms. hit yourself in the head with a tack hammer. Jesus.
Well, the good news is we've done 2 episodes about vampires, so you can go listen to those if you're still
We did more
confused.
than that, JR. We've done more than that. With
We've done 2
vampires.
panels on vampires.
We've done a lot.
Oh. All right, so what is it about the vampire? Stabby, what are you doing?
Playing with a dragon.
Oh, you're playing with the dragon. Okay. So what is it about vampire hunting or the vampire hunters that makes them a mystique that keeps getting used over and over again that people are so in love with?
Because they're cool. You know, you take a mortal man that's facing the undead, someone that's essentially immortal with crazy powers, depending on what medium you're going into. Even like Dracula had amazing powers. So you have a mortal man that's facing the unknown, he's facing the supernatural, and he's doing it with a wooden stick and some crucifixes. And you know, it's a David and Goliath tale, I think. You know?
Well, it's an apex predator. I mean, what
Exactly.
the kind of person who decides they're going to jump in the way of an apex predator? There's something really special going on there. And for stories, vampires are, because they're such an apex predator, werewolves have the same kind of thing going on. They're both kind of up there at the top of what we look at as our supernatural pantheon, per se. And so you have to say, well, what threatens them? What keeps the story interesting? Because if there's never anything that can threaten them, then they become kind of not interesting anymore. They have to have that ability to be threatened by something in order to stay interesting, in order to tell a story. There's got to be conflict.
It's the threat that makes it interesting.
Yep.
Yeah. And it's risk from something that you would think they'd, squish like a bug, and yet that's not what happens.
I think it's also important to note that vampires are near universal, that most ancient cultures that all of the modern world is based off of have some sort of vampiric creature. And so it is a creature that has been so ingrained in our mythos and in what we write about, what we read about, what we watch, that it appeals to something in base humans.
One thing I find interesting about vampire hunters is that the most common archetype that comes to mind is actually based on someone who did not hunt vampires. The overall aesthetic of Van Helsing, the Hugh Jackman movie, which is kind of a pretty like if you said vampire hunter to someone, that might be the sort of thing they would picture. That whole aesthetic is based on Solomon Kane.
Yep.
Yeah, it is. There's also the vampire hunter in Dracula 2000, which is a really good movie, and they made some egregious sequels for some reason. But even with John Carpenter's vampires, you have James Woods did a really awesome job as a vampire. Thought that was really cool.
Well, you get something that preys on people, and somewhere you get somebody who stands up and says that's enough of that. I mean, the vampire hunter I write about is a New Orleans police officer who runs into the supernatural and goes, if I don't do this, then people die. Moms and kids don't go home tonight. Their husbands don't go home for them. I'm uniquely situated to do this, and I'm willing to take up, to step in the way. And that's what we get with a lot of them, is people who, for one reason or another, and I'm sure we'll get into what drives the vampire hunters because it's a really interesting discussion point. But for one reason or another, they're willing to step up and say, this is where the line is. I'm drawing the line right here and saying, you don't get to hunt other people. You don't get to eat people, basically.
No, I agree with you. It's a mortal person, male or female, because we've seen female and male and protagonists as vampire hunters, where they plant their foot in the ground. They're like, no, you move, even though they know they are ridiculously outmatched as far as strength and powers, but they draw that line in the sand. And I think that's what makes those characters so interesting, is because they are so outmatched, and you want to watch them. Everybody loves a winner, and we want to see how they win. Like, how are you going to outsmart? How are you going to outmaneuver? How are you going to outpower this, essentially a deity that wants nothing more than to kill you. It's like, how's that going to work?
Well, and we brought up with the apex predator. Other apex predators don't generally aren't a threat to the most of the human populace. Like our bears, our tigers, unless you live out there with them, they're all pushed to the forefront. And what we really think of as a threat normally is other people. Like if you think about a person being killed violently, it's generally through someone else. It's through crime or something along those lines. But then we're looking at somebody who normally would be the scariest thing around. Your vampire hunter has to be tougher than pretty much any other normal person. And they're going after something that is beyond what normal mortals can do.
Right.
I like that. And it's also, vampires kill in it's a very intimate kind of way. And you think about it when you talk about, killings and stuff with police and whatever, biting is, you have to be right there in somebody's face in order to bite them, in order to attack them that way. And so that ramps up that fear of vampires, because it's not just, you might get hit by a bus, you might get shot from a hill, whatever, but this is in your face kind of violence. And it's very personal and it's very intimate. It's the taking of blood. It's all of those kinds of things. So when you get the hunter involved there, that's what they're up against. This is not going to be a long distance fight. This is going to be a face-to-face throwdown.
That, and most of the vampires that you see in media, they're very charming. Mm-hmm. They can redirect your emotions by getting to feel a sense of sympathy for them. They are narcissistic, yeah.
So sometimes it's sympathy, and sometimes there's some kind of seduction or things like that. But I think that's another aspect of, like, hunters are defined by their prey, and vampires are scary on another level compared to even other undead. Zombies are scary in number, but everybody's cracked a joke about how one zombie or zombie apocalypse or movies, they always require some kind of like goofy scenario or something like that to happen. But the vampire, right, a single one is a nightmare. And it's totally sentient, totally intelligent, and knows everything that a normal person would know, if not more. It may have hundreds of years of experience on you.
Right. It's got centuries. The scariest ones have centuries of experience of the human condition. So that, I think that's what makes them so scary, is because they have that centuries wealth of knowledge and how to manipulate things and how to, maneuver people. I think that's what makes them probably one of the scariest monsters out there.
Well, it's also the fact that what makes the vampire hunter scary is, or the vampire scary to the hunter, is because in a lot of the lore, you could be turned into the monster you're trying to eradicate. So right. That's right. The running joke about, the vegan being turned into a vampire, right? Because, now they've got to eat flesh or whatever. But that's what makes it scary, is because it's the monster that anybody could become in the wrong situation.
Right. It's very akin to being a zombie, because the person that kills the zombie or kills the vampire could very easily, once bitten, both are ways to transmit that disease or that condition. It's like you can fight the vampire and there's still a chance that you could become a vampire. You could be the very thing you were trying to hunt. And then you get characters like Blade from Marvel's comics. Yep. Who is a vampire? He does need blood to survive, but he uses his strength, his gifts from vampirism to be a hunter.
And I would say that for me personally, my favorite hunters are some form of monster or dhampir, half vampire. Blade D from Vampire Hunter D, who for me is kind of the epitome of a classic hunter. Gabriel de Leon from the Empire of the Vampire series. And what's cool about all of these heroes is that they are literally staring into the abyss, as the famous quote goes. And the abyss looks back. They're fighting the exact same urges And it shows that kind of the difference between a man and a monster is often not the makeup. It's not the skills. It's not the things that they do or can do. It's the application of those skills. It's the application of who they are, whether they're protecting or preying.
It's really a psychology interpretation review of somebody's mind and their influences and inspirations and things like that. You see that in a lot of things. Man, we could do a correlation episode based on vampires and zombies because essentially, if you break it down, they're the same thing. They have the same inspirations.
So before we get too far afield, let's talk about the elephant in the room. How does one kill a vampire?
Depends on the lore.
So that actually touches on what I was going to bring up earlier is that, so you mentioned that vampires have centuries of experience. Well, a vampire hunter has access to centuries of experience. One of the things that I think has been lost in the more martial depiction that stemmed from the canification of vampire hunters is that the original vampire hunters were more like librarians.
Yes.
That they basically just sifted through tomes and tomes of church lore to find the proper way to deal with these things.
It was theory versus application.
Right. Almost the Batman effect, where the vampire hunter can win if they have sufficient preparation time.
If they have enough prep time.
And access to the right Vatican archives. So now that we're talking about how to kill them, I mean, that's how they figure out how to kill them. They have to have access to the right Vatican archives or the right old babushka somewhere in the Eastern Hill Country who happens to know what they did to the last vampire that was there in her granddad's day.
Trial and error. That's what it comes down to. It's trial and error. Because just because you don't get much error.
Right. No, you don't get an error. And if you make an error, then I don't think your result gets logged.
But here's the thing is we have all these cinematic versions of how to kill a vampire in our head. But if you look at the most recent news article of them digging up a vampire and her child, there is no stake in their heart. There is no garlic in the grave. They are just bound and shackled in steel. They were bound to the earth. That's all. So, and there was no proof of anything entering the chest cavity in order to, stab them in the heart. So how much of it is actually just cinematic hogwash and how much of it is actually true? Once again, that brings us back to trial and error. What did they know back then, shackling these people in steel, that we don't know now?
Well, how do they know that the bodies they found shackled in steel were vampires?
Apparently, there was a gravestone that said, "Here's lies the vampire."
Right, because that's a credible source.
It's not. There's stories to be told. Like, how does that happen?
Oh, sure. I'm not saying there's no such thing as vampires. I'm just saying that that's not necessarily a direct representation of how you would probably.
No, I agree with you. It's like COVID, and I'm probably going to hate mail for this sentence step.
I'm getting ready for this one.
Are you telling me that vampires were caused by some genius forgetting to close his refrigerator door in China?
Biting a bat in a shop somewhere? I don't know. Like, we're all creative people here. We all make stories for a living. It's easy to influence people with incredible stories. Like, and then you go back to the day where, like, the Salem witch trials and other things. You can go back further than that, where you think that this person is a vampire. There's patents. There's United States patents about people that were buried and not actually fully dead. So there's some bell ringing, Saved by the Bell. Like, you have all these miraculous things caused by, that create the macabre. They create these interesting stories. Vampirism is one of them.
You
So
could go to
speaking
the
of
present day in Africa where they kill vampires by putting a tire full of gasoline around their neck and lighting it on fire.
Yeah,
Next
they
time.
kill other people like that too.
So,
Very
so
effective way to.
Most of the ways you kill a vampire work perfectly fine on normal people. So if you're
Yeah,
a vampire
they're
hunter,
the-
you can also be a manhunter.
They're universal ways of killing. I wanted to bring that up. And that's what makes vampire stories. I feel like they're more effective in what I would call like lore technology worlds, or more in the past. When you start hitting vampires with 50 caliber, machine guns, they get a lot less scary. When you bust out that Modus or a tank or things, the higher technology gets, you can generate catastrophic damage from a distance. When you go to the, like more 18th century model, and you've got a musket at best, or, a wheel lock pistol or something along those lines, then this really is an in-your-face fight. And then you're sticking to the tried and trues: fire, decapitation, pinning it with enough spears that you
As
can.
somebody who shot somebody with a 50 cal, I can tell you that is the great equalizer. Like, I don't care what supernatural branch you are. If I hit you with a 50 cal, here's the beauty part. I don't even have to hit you with the bullet. It just needs to go by you. And it's going to do catastrophic damage. I
think they actually tested that where they fired it past a gel dummy and the gel dummy was untouched. Like
I watched a gunner shoot a dude who didn't wait in traffic in Baghdad. It didn't hit him. It went by him and it surgically scalped the top of his brain and then spilled his brain and his all that stuff in the back seat.
Okay. Let's try to keep this safe for work. So yeah, no, we're going too far. No. You're going too far. Let's stop talking about brain matter.
Because
all right, so let's talk about the next thing. So we've got. Do you guys think it's more compelling story when you see vampires hunting solo, or when there are groups of them in some sort of secret organization that are going after?
I like the group, man. I think that makes it so much scarier when there's a group of these people, these types of people going on. Those are the stories that I really enjoy. Those are the ones that I really love because it really puts so much pressure on the protagonist or the protagonist. Like, it makes me think, like, how is he going to get out of this? Or how is she going to get out of this? Like, there was episodes of Buffy. We mentioned Buffy earlier. Buffy had to fight hives, hordes.
No. You're not understanding the question.
He's talking about like if a group of hunters or a lone hunter. So a Van Helsing or a monster hunter. Like
so
we're Larry Correa's work.
Okay. No, I mean, I like later stuff, but we're talking about a group of hunters. So you're talking about movies like John Carpenter's Vampires, where he had a team. Teams work good, but we've also seen in a lot of fictional work that the team doesn't always hold true. We've seen it in literature. We've seen it in movies where you have one guy that falls short of his duties or her duties, and next thing that the whole team is just in jeopardy.
I think that can actually make it easier to write a team, or you have more options when you're writing a team, because if you're writing hunter versus vampire, generally speaking, people know how it's going to end, because I can't think of too many stories where the vampire wins. So you might not be sure how he's going to pull it off, but the hunter's probably winning. But if you have a team, well, not everyone might make it. And so the characters can actually be at a more plausible sense of risk, if that makes sense. So like if I'm reading a story about Van Helsing and him fighting a vampire, I'm not really worried about him. He's probably going to be fine. But if Van Helsing has like 3 assistants with him, then
red shirts
might go.
I think that I don't know, maybe I'm one of those weird people, but when I read any kind of fantasy story, I do look for some element of reality. That's what makes it compelling when people that have fought or things like that, when they They write their stories, and they write things like Mill Sci-Fi or anything else. If an MMA fighter writes an MMA story, it's more compelling because there's that real life element to it. Nobody in the world in their right mind goes and hunts a bear by themselves. They may be the one that stalks forward that last 500 feet and makes the kill, but you should always have somebody standing behind you with a shotgun. A vampire is no different. If you go by yourself and you're not inhuman yourself, that's a bad plan. And so I prefer seeing the team because, as Nathan mentioned, that's going to give you somebody that can actually be in jeopardy. And on top of that, you don't, it's just something you don't do. It's not a good idea.
Well, and it's story points with a team or with various hunters organizations and that kind of thing. You start playing politics. The how do different people look at the end goal? I deal with this again where there's multiple hunter cabals because generally one hunter cannot be everywhere. If you figure that we once did math on how many people it would take to sustain a vampire and thus how many you could have in various areas and all that kind of stuff, and it was a lot of fun. But it boiled down to you really couldn't have even one hunter team that could keep up with the incidents if you had them at a consistent rate. And so you start getting you would probably have multiple teams in different areas who would have different ideas about what they're doing, why they're doing it, what the end result should be. And those politics and those differences become interesting points of story and interesting points of conflict beyond just the hunter versus the hunted. You get that those who are genocidists who say every vampire every time, and those who go, well, wait, has the vampire actually done anything wrong except for existing? Is there a space for allowing them to live as long as they're not taking human life? And you start getting into these really interesting discussions that can be part of the conflict that goes on. So I do enjoy the team for that. The Lone Hunter is a different kind of story because it's generally about that character's personal journey. It is their redemption arc, their coming back to religion arc very often, or going through a religious awakening, because we very often, especially early on, got a very tight relationship between the Catholic Church and vampire hunting. And so it's a different kind of story. That bigger action adventure hunter story really does lend itself to the group. But those other stories about the individual hunter, it's about their character arc. It's about what D from Vampire Hunter D is going through and the redemption that he's trying to earn, versus being a bigger story about what is the role of what do vampires do to society and who stands in the way of that. So it's what kind of story is it that we want to tell, because both are very satisfying.
So speaking of what kind of story, that does raise the question, do you like it when the vampire hunter is the protagonist or the antagonist? Because from the vampire's point of view, the hunter is the bad guy, right? Obviously, this crazy person is just trying to cut me down and kill me for existing.
Mm-hmm.
I prefer the hunter to be the protagonist because, hey, everyone, what if the church were evil is a really tired trope.
Yep.
I'm not even talking about necessarily having to weigh in on the church, because a lot of the vampire hunt, it started with the church, but if you take it to a modern setting, a lot of times, they acknowledge the past, but then they make no commentary on the present. They just, we've evolved past that kind of approach, so they can
the
just
Catholic Church is evil. I'm just saying.
Well, but getting into that, you do see, as our one romance writer here, in paranormal romance, you do see that question come up, because very often the vampire and the usually girl that he is developing a relationship with and that kind of thing, they are a protagonist couple at that point, and you will see vampire hunters as the antagonist, and it works within the genre. But when you take it back into urban fantasy, in urban fantasy, most of the time we see the vampire hunter as the protagonist, or the vampire who is a hunter as the protagonist, because those vampires who are doing the attacking are seen as antagonists or evil. But sometimes in the paranormal romance, when we cross that genre boundary, then we see something different, because then the vampires are a very different kind of character. They're generally not evil in that way. They are antagonists, they are love interests, and we don't want the love interest to get staked. That's bad. And it's the angel problem in Buffy. Angel has a soul, therefore he is different. Therefore, hunting him doesn't work. It's not a thing that she wants to do.
It is such a shame that they didn't use him to be Batman, because Angel was Batman.
Yes, he was.
And it was such a great show. It just so bad they never grabbed him to be Batman.
Okay,
I'm sorry, JR. I don't mean to cut you off, but I want to throw this in that when it comes to vampires, we spoke about this earlier. Like there's an intimacy thing here, and so if we're talking about being the hero or the villain, either way, the vampire and the hunter need to have some sort of intimate interaction. And you can run that either way. You can make the vampire that is constantly hounded by this dogged, stubborn, religious zealot, or you can make a hero who stands up and is fighting what amounts to a superpowered serial killer. Either way, they need to play off of each other. So whatever kind of story that you're working on or reading, there has to be that connection. I think that we can talk about not with vampires, because the vampire version hasn't happened yet. Though I guess I could bring up Susan, like we were talking about Larry Correa's work. Earl is a fantastic example. Earl's one of my favorite characters. He's the one werewolf that isn't a total nut job that doesn't tear everyone to pieces. He's the exception to the rule. And y'all know from me being on here before, I love writing the exception to the rule. But with Susan and Julie's relationship, talking about from a vampire this time, there's this constant creepy and dark and scary intimacy where Julie's the hunter and she's having to hunt her mom, or her mom is hunting her. And
you
that's
to an
important.
interesting point. That it's the seduction aspect. It is what makes it so creepy. Like, seduction otherwise is not a creepy concept, but when you throw it into vampires and how they use seduction, it makes it creepy. Like, you lose your will. You buy into what they're selling, because they're really good at that, the vampires.
It's only creepy if he's not a billionaire.
I was just thinking of that comic.
Yeah. If they're not a billionaire, it's an episode of Criminal Minds. I get it.
Or cops. So
if you are a billionaire, it's a best-selling series.
So getting back on track to vampire hunting. So what do you think? Like, obviously you could get any motivation out there. If you can dream it, you can write it. But what do you think makes the most compelling motivation for a vampire? What drives someone to go hunting the vampire?
Loss.
Yeah. Loss is the ultimate answer.
Yeah, that's like, if we look at vampires as a genre, whether it's movies, books, whatever, your vampire hunter is mostly motivated by loss. He lost a family member, he lost a wife, he lost a child, and that's what drives them.
Well,
a lot of people get triggered because of loss.
What? Again there.
I say, what were you saying, Nathan? I was trying to get everyone else to weigh in.
Oh no, I think Jesse was trying to say something.
Oh, it's Jesse. Okay, go ahead.
So we just spoke about, like, there's a seduction, intimacy aspect to the vampire, and the fact of the matter is, there's a viral TikTok or whatever going around now, and hey, you're a super powerful vampire, but you got to drain somebody once a week. Would you do it? Like, that's bouncing around Facebook and everything right now. And the answer is, if you don't have a ridiculously strong motivation to say no to being an immortal apex predator that is almost always rich and powerful and wanted, you're not going to say no. If I could shepherd my family for the rest of my life and make sure that my grandkids have everything they ever wanted, and the cost is I have to eat a pedo once a week, yeah, deal, sign me up.
Yeah, you get to choose your prey, so you have that advantage.
So you've got to really have something that motivates you, like that needs Inigo Montoya, you killed my father, prepared to die vibes, or you're just going to say yes.
Well, there's that, and again, there are certain people who are just paladins by nature. They're the people that and you know a lot of them. A lot of them end up in the military. A lot of them end up as police officers and first responders. The people that say everybody else is important to me. It's the Captain America thing about who's going to drop on the grenade. And it's not necessarily even vengeance there, but it's I'm the guy that's going to take that sacrifice throw. And we get a lot of that in Vampire Hunters too, who go, we get revenge, we get loss, we get those who are chasing it because of religious reasons. So you get the zealots and things like that. And then you get the protectors, and the protectors are they're the same people that are going to throw themselves in front of any other kind of bullet. And they're going to jump in there and say, once they know that this exists, that this is a possibility, they're the ones who are going to go, how do I get tough enough? And how do I step in front of this because nobody else should have to? And I love that story.
You're wearing a Batman hat, which tells you everything about that type of person. Because if we look at Batman, and he was scarred as a child by watching his parents get murdered, and he devoted his life to make sure that didn't happen to anybody else. So he took a martyr role, and I think that's what we deal with a lot of the vampire hunters. If we look at them, either in literature or movies, they're taking a martyr role. They don't want to see that happen to somebody else that they've experienced. They don't want that kid to lose his family based on a vampire. They don't want any of that. So they build themselves up and they train, and that's all they want to do is make sure that doesn't happen to somebody else because of the pain that they experienced.
So one of the reasons that we haven't hit on, but I think also happens, and I think about like if you use the military example like Jana did earlier, is the family tradition angle. You do it because your dad did it, because his dad did it, and you can trace all the way back. It's like that old Forrest Gump, like someone in my family has died in every war since, and you get that little montage.
Yeah.
That's the Lieutenant Dan thing. That was funny because it's so true about the military. And I think that works as a story plot too. It's the family angle. You're a hunter because you were born into a hunting family.
Well, I mean, Supernatural dealt with that really well. The Winchesters, they did what they did because that was the family tradition. And
we're also not talking about when you're the chosen one. So this comes back to Buffy and a little bit in Supernatural, this, that, and the other. Sometimes the hunting chooses
a little bit of Star Wars too.
Yeah, you're Buffy the Vampire Slayer sitting there wanting to go to high school and do all of these things, and ta-da, you're it. And it's like, well, but I don't want to be it. Tough Rocks, you're it. The cosmos has decided that this is your thing. Here's your super strength. Here's your watcher. Go figure it out. So sometimes we get that too, where it is just the out of the blue, walking along dumb as dirt, and now tag you're it. And those are kind of interesting too.
With the family angle, sometimes what can feed into that is the fact that no one outside the family knows that they exist. Mm-hmm. That this is our family thing because no one else believes in vampires, but we know they're real because we've been hunting them for 400 years. Right. And you also mentioned the martyr thing. That's one thing that you do sometimes see in this sort of fiction as well, is that hunting the vampire is sometimes a one-way trip, because you get the vampire, but he got you at some point, and so before you turn, you take a walk out into the sunlight or whatever.
Right, and those are really interesting tales when those are done. The hunter becomes what he was hunted, and he makes that ultimate sacrifice. He becomes that martyr.
Not necessarily a hunter, but Midnight Mass is one example of that, where before he got worse.
Midnight Mass is so awesome.
I didn't love the navel gazing soliloquy at the end, but right up until that last 5 minutes or so, it was pretty excellent.
Yes, yes, it was. I agree with you on.
I'd argue that's family's another major motivation. That's a major human motivation. Everybody, I feel like for the most part, kind of understands if you grew up in a normal family, which who did, but anyway, that those ingrained values, I would argue that family is a form of faith. It's a form of religion almost, that it affects people and hits people at their heart to the same level that can. And that's what it all kind of has to come down to for me with the vampire hunter. Is I wrote a vampire hunter that hunts for money, but he's a supernatural himself. And his desire to be an apex predator, his innate drive to constantly to prove he's the biggest and baddest, is his reason for facing monsters. But it has to be something at the core of your character, or the character that you love for those reasons. That's why they fight.
And while you think about this deep state, I'm going to pause for a moment while we shamelessly shill for the woman today. Boom!
What is taking the night? There's the lady lead, who comes from a secret island to live in the big city as the daughter of a mafia underboss. Add a vigilante who goes after the more unsavory bits of family business. He helps her out of a spot of trouble. From there, the stakes and the body count only go up. Taking the Night by J.F. Posthumous. Narrated by Terry K. Job. Available on Amazon.
Hey, we know that voice.
Yay! All right, thank you for sticking with us through that commercial interlude. All right, so we've talked about the kind of the vampire hunter, and Nick, I want you to pause yourself for a second because your printer's getting loud for a second. What do you think is some of the best franchises out there? If you wanted to point someone who's like, I've never read about a vampire hunter before, what would you recommend?
Oh, good question.
So
I got to champion Empire the Vampire by Jay Kristoff. That particular series for me is one of the things that I picked up and said, man, I wish I'd have wrote this. I think it's a fantastic series. Gabriel, the main character, is snarky and dark and constantly battling against his own nature to make sure that everybody survives. I throw that out. If you've never seen Vampire Hunter D, then you're doing yourself a disservice. It is a quintessential anime, and anime is an art, and that, if you don't watch 100 other series, that's fine, but you should watch D.
Okay. What about you, Jana?
I think you could do a lot worse than going back and watching Buffy, just as a way to introduce you to a lot of the different things that come into what is a vampire, what is a hunter, what is the conflict there. Because bringing it to the level of teenagers also makes it very approachable in an interesting way, in a humorous horror way. And so I would start people there. The Gabriel Knight games, those are a little bit older, but those were kind of brilliant. He's a shadow hunter, but it's still a supernatural hunter, and we still see that happening. So I'd start there. Van Helsing with Hugh Jackman is fun. A lot of it is eye candy, and I'm okay with eye candy too.
So
I think you were on something. Oh, sorry.
When you say Buffy the Vampire Slayer, are you talking about the movie or the TV series? Do you have a preference?
Oh, TV series. The movie was so very, very campy and tremendously fun for that. But for more of a what are the stakes, to pun intended, of being a vampire hunter, I think the show did it better for most of the seasons. There's a slowdown towards the end where things get a little bit goofy face, but for the most part, it's a really interesting look at what does it mean to be a hunter. What does it mean, to have those relationships? What does it mean to try to maintain your relationships while you're this person? Because that's something we haven't really talked about a lot, but it's a real problem of there's a lot of isolation there to be the one that is strong enough, that is supernatural enough, that is whatever to do that. How do you associate and how do you connect with normal people? And that handles some of those things in a way that I find really interesting.
The one thing the movie had that was hilarious was the scene at the end where the school dance and everyone's dead and the principal's going around giving all the dead people detention slips.
Yeah.
That was the hilarious. And then the death scene at the end of The Vampire where it just went on and on. That was all improv, and it was so funny they kept it.
I think if you're gonna really point somebody towards vampire hunters, Jana's on the right path there, because with Buffy, not only do you get the vampire hunter that eventually falls in love with the vampire itself, but you get other vampire hunters as well. You get, Faith, and you get I cannot even remember the other two vampire hunters' names, and they are just very and they're all so different. So you're getting the ones that are, this is my job, I'm going to do it. I don't care how nice they are. I don't care that they have a soul. And then you have the ones that are a little bit more like, wait a minute. So you get all the different sides of the different vampire hunters. And I think that's a great place to start if somebody is getting into the whole vampire and vampire hunter world.
What about you, Nathan? You got any favorites?
So I'd probably recommend the Monster Hunter International series. It's not always hunting vampires, but vampires play a pretty huge role in the first one in the series. For a more unconventional pick, I'd go with Carpe Jugulum by Terry Pratchett.
Oh, good choice.
It's really great. It's part of the books he wrote about the three witches. But the main center point in Carpe Jugulum is that the vampires are genre savvy. And they cheat effectively. Mm-hmm. It's not a spoiler to tell you that the patriarch of the vampire clan regularly exposes his children to random religious objects so that they can build up a tolerance.
It's a great book.
Nick, you haven't weighed in. Are there any good vampire hunting comics out there? You gotta unmute.
Oh, that was a question for me. Yeah.
Yeah.
Yeah, there's a few. There's some really good vampire hunting comic books out there. It's another medium, it's.
Are there any that you would recommend?
The Vampire Hunter D manga is really good, and there's lots of material if you want to dive into that. There's a plethora of books. But there's new stuff being made every day, that I see on social media. There's some really cool, well, at least the artwork's cool. I don't know about the story. I have no idea. But a Vampire Hunter D manga, get some of that. That's awesome.
Good to know. We'll put that in the show notes as well. So, Jana, you are the resident gamer in chief of this podcast. So, what do you got for us in that realm?
So, World of Darkness, back in second and third edition when it was still good, the re-releases have not been impressive. But back in those editions, they did a hunter book that was a hunter module about fighting various supernaturals. And that was interesting. It was well done. I ran a couple of campaigns there that were the hunter campaigns going after the supernatural. And we had a great deal of fun with that. There were a lot of mushes, multi-user shared hallucination. Back in the mush and mud days, because you with exactly how old I am. And bulletin board systems where we played World of Darkness and did a lot with that. And then the very classic vampire module for Dungeons and Dragons is Ravenloft. And you meet Stroud, and you have to deal with this. And I've gone through Ravenloft probably, 10 times. And it's never entirely the same because there's so many different things you could do with it. There's different additions to the modules. There's a lot of different things that you do there. So there's a lot you can do with tabletop role-playing games where they bring that in, especially when you're dealing with that kind of stuff. And there's a couple of other urban fantasy kind of games where the vampire is important. And World of Darkness had their vampire game that there was a computer game, and there were hunters in that too.
So you were
more. So go, Nathan, or Jesse.
Oh, I was going to add with you bringing up Vampire the Masquerade and the World of Darkness that just like Warhammer and Warhammer 40K, Vampire the Masquerade and the attached games to that, they have a huge literary universe that has all kinds of media attached to it. So you don't have to be a gamer to enjoy those universes. You can dive right in on novels, on games, TV shows, whatever. They've got a little bit of all of it. And you can just enjoy the lore, enjoy the story behind the game, even if you don't have 6 hours to sit down with your friends and play a campaign.
And Nathan, you had some that you typed in the side chat. So what were you saying?
And if the tabletop campaign isn't enough for you, you can technically play the Vampire the Masquerade LARP, but I refuse to recommend it. Skyrim also has the Dawn Guard campaign, and vampires play a pretty significant role in, I believe, every Elder Scrolls game. Maybe not Arena, but I know at least from Daggerfall on, they all have the possibility of becoming a vampire. And Skyrim adds in the option to hunt said vampires. And since you mentioned Warhammer, the Inquisition and Witch Hunters in Warhammer have a pretty strong Solomon Kane inspired vamp hunter vibe to them. Very much the religious zealot angle, but again, they have the Puritan hats, they have the wheellock pistols, they have the rapiers, they have the holy relics. And there's definitely a lot of vampires in Warhammer.
I did not know that about the Warhammer. Is there anything unique about their take on it? Because Warhammer tends to go big or go home as their approach to things.
So I probably know a little more about 40K than Warhammer itself. I don't know that they're terribly unique. The thing about the Empire in Warhammer is that it tends to not be unique, and that in itself is kind of unique. So a lot of things nowadays try to be subversions, or like, you've never seen this before, even though you probably have, but they just slapped a new coat of paint on it. The Empire is very much, this is a classic human fantasy empire. Yes, they ride griffins. Yes, they have witch hunters. Everything that you're expecting to see here, they have. You're not going to be surprised when you start playing. If you're not sure what you want to do this, and it'll be everything you expect it to be.
There is a faction in the Warhammer Fantasy universe that is basically universally undead. That may be the unique angle. That has vampire generals and foot soldiers. All the other undead are in there. There's a mummy type character. There's skeletons and things like that. But you're going to see that's kind of the unique thing, is that there's an entire army of undead.
So their vampire hunters definitely very busy. Speaking of methods to combat vampires, I was present at a steampunk convention several years ago where a fairly well-known martial instructor had been contracted to train the audience in the art of fighting vampires. He was able to adapt Scottish dirk to basically primarily target the torso, since it's mostly a stabbing weapon. But yeah, so if you ever want to learn how to fight vampires, I would recommend either Scottish dirk or German rondel, and then just use a stake, I guess, if that's a concern of yours.
Yeah, which really isn't something we've talked about much, but especially when you start bringing in some of the fun, both ancient and more modern weaponry, you get into some really cool things that you can do, and you see a lot of that in I'm thinking like in Underworld and this, that, and the other, that they have rounds that have silver nitrate in them or that have agardic essence in them. You get all sorts of jacketed bullets of different sorts. And then you go back to, are you going to stab them with a stake? Does it have to be a wooden stake? Does it have to be? And so you can do a lot as a writer or a creator with what the rules of your universe are, because we do get into that. Usually it's fire, decapitation, and staking that cause the problem. And in World of Darkness, to stake a vampire, it didn't it put it in suspended animation. And you could pull the stake out later and feed him, and the vampire would come back. So when you get into those weapon types, there's a lot that you can play with to say, what is it that's most effective? How do vampire hunters lay hands on this? Because a lot of this stuff is not easy to lay hands on. And what are you going to do with that? How do you armor yourself up? I've seen some great artwork with neck pieces and things like that when a vampire hunter is going up against vampires, so that even if they do get past your guard and try to gnaw on you, they're gnawing on a mouthful of metal. So there's a lot that you can do with how do you hunt a vampire? Well, which stig is your favorite, and how do you go from there?
Interesting. Yeah. So the wooden stake is definitely iconic, but some of the other ones could be fun to play with. I think it comes down to what the lore of the individual universes are as well.
Well, right, because in some cases the type of wood matters. Like I think white oak is generally preferred, but that may or may not matter again depending on the setting.
Ash and some legends as well.
Yeah. And rowan and hawthorn are often things that will stop or slow a vampire down, which then gives you the opportunity to do something about it. And like in World of Darkness, one of the things they did was each of their vampiric sects had different weaknesses. And Jim Butcher did this as well when he talked about his different vampires, his different courts. And so to be a truly effective hunter, there is a lot of research that either you have to do or you've got a team that's doing, which goes back to something that Jesse said earlier. I think it was Jesse, about what Vatican records do have a handle on, because if it's this kind of vampire here, garlic rounds matter. If it's this kind of vampire over here, not so much. So there is that in order to fight them, that not the knowledge that you need, and then how do you adjust that weapon type? We saw Harry Dresden use holy water paintballs. I've seen a suggestion that you put holy water in a sauna and then convince them to walk into the steam room. And it's like, ooh, that would be a nasty way to go.
Or humidifier.
Go ahead. Oh yeah, humidifier. So interesting
Super
ways
soaker.
to do it. And does holy water work if you're not Catholic and if you don't believe? And that's also that aspect of, does it require faith in order to use those kinds of weapons against a vampire?
As a for instance, if you're a Malkavian, your weakness is antipsychotic medications.
Hey, it makes sense today.
So Stabby also did some quick Googling because she's better than the FBI at that. And she found some vampire hunter comics that include, there's a Blade comic, The Tomb of Dracula, The Ghost of Dracula, Dampier, Vampironica, The Strain, and New Blood are all vampire comics. If you're into comics, you should check those out. Google 3 out of 3 recommends. I don't know. What is
I don't know. I didn't check the stars, but I also sent you a couple pictures of our 2024 vampire dig. The most recent one.
Oh, okay. I will look those up and share those as well. Here, let me pull that up. Somebody talk while I drag these so we don't have no air.
I mentioned it earlier, and I think it was Nick who actually brought up research, but your hunter is defined by their prey by nature. And I think that that's a really important thing, is that if we start talking about how to kill a vampire, well, as everybody said, it depends on the lore, but your hunter's going to have to put that work in. If they can do like an MHI and just burn them down with enough firepower, I would argue Larry's one of the few people that made those vampires actually scary, because a master vamp just ate it and didn't care. And that was nightmarish.
All right, so here is the image that Stabby found for us about the article. I'm going to zoom in a little bit, but it says, remains of female vampire pinned to the ground with sickle across her throat.
She had shackles around her ankles, but they hadn't found it at that point because her lower half still had to be dug up. So, but she did have shackles around her ankles as well.
And then if we zoom in, you get just the image. This is the original dig, what they first found that caught their attention. And she has mighty white teeth, so she had good dental care.
She must have been really naughty girl to get buried with a sickle around her neck.
Going by the teeth, are we sure that was from England?
Oh, harsh.
I don't know. It said Poland.
Yeah, it said Poland.
That makes a little bit more sense.
Yeah, a little bit.
Now, I wonder, though, you said they were steel, not iron?
It might have been iron. I said steel earlier, but if you've ever watched our podcast, then you know I am horrible dyslexic, and I get my words mixed up a lot.
Okay, just because I know iron, specific alloys of iron is usually efficacious against unnatural creatures, whereas other metals may not be.
It's possible. I was going off of memory at first, and I was like, you know what? I have time to search this real quick. Let me find it.
So one of the things it says in the caption she sent me is that she had a silk hat. Is there any lore about silk being related to vampires, or is that just an incidental detail when they buried her?
Incidental.
Yeah, not to my knowledge.
Okay.
You know what? It was probably of note because it didn't look like there was any other textile remnants.
That could be it.
Yeah, it's just the sickle, and I'm looking at the other photos here. It's the sickle, and then the shackles around the ankles.
Right, but those would be more likely to survive long-term internment. The fact that the silk cap was still, I guess, in a recognizable state, maybe that was just a better quality of material than whatever else she was dressed in. Maybe she had cotton or wool or linen elsewhere, and that degraded, whereas the silk didn't, because silk can be a bit more resilient.
I will dig that article up based on I can do a title search, and we can link that in the show notes, dear listener, if you want to give that article a read. It's definitely kind of cool that, you realize at some point in time, we think it's just fantasy and it's just cool lore and game and book material. But at one point in time, some of the stuff people believed was real. So that makes it, I think, even more compelling when you write stories now because, nobody that we know of has actually met an alien. So there's really no stakes. But when you start talking about vampire hunters, there are people who've died because of these beliefs, literally. Whether you believe the vampires themselves are real or not is another issue. There have been people that have died because beliefs in pro or con against like witchcraft and stuff. And that's why, the witch stories are so compelling because at one point in time, you could have lost family members to that.
Well, and there's even names from certain parts of the world that go back to these sorts of creatures. I mean, Verholak is a name from, I believe, Slovakia, and it just means werewolf. And that's a family name that goes all the way back to the old country. Were those people werewolves? Probably not, but go ahead.
If you think about it, prior to people being called cannibals, they were called vampires. So I guess it really depends where you're from.
Well, and then there's also all the old ideas that it was, I forget the specific disorder, hemophilia.
Hemophilia.
That caused a need for consumption of blood.
Yeah, it was a deficiency in vitamin D, I think.
Well, we're going to do a moment.
Where does that come from?
Since Nick's introduction to this episode already shot the family-friendly episode, I am going to show this. It is an ankle picture. It is scandalous, but we will try to control ourselves and our impure thoughts. But this is the ankle as found with the metallic leg irons.
Yeah, I'd hit that.
Yeah, not steel, probably iron.
I'm just saying, try to control yourselves, people. It is an ankle.
Oh, the ankles. Oh, my God. So hot right now.
But yeah, I just love that.
Lovely and bony.
Did you get that from her only chains?
I like boobs myself.
Nick, tone it down. All right, so we will link that article. You can read it yourself. Nick will try to control himself. I know that racy ankle almost undid him, but we'll try to
hot right now. So hot with the ankles.
So, do you like it when these stories that are the modern era stories about vampire hunters tie back to the lore, or do you like it when they sort of start fresh?
I like the lore.
Same.
Jana, Jesse?
If they get too far away from the lore, then it starts becoming something new. It's not a vampire anymore. That's the heart of tropes when we talk about these things. And vampires as a story vehicle is a trope, is that we are taking the familiar and then we tend to add stuff to it and we put a twist on it. And so if we get way far away from it and we say, well, we're calling it vampires, but they consume Coca-Cola, that can be great satire, but it's not really a vampire story anymore as we know it. So I think we have to at least give a good nod to the lore. You have to decide which parts you're going to use. But then if you want to mess with it to say, this is the unique spin. I'll bring it up. It's the Twilight thing. The vampires are going to sparkle, and so you hunt them by doing something different. I know. Sorry, Stabby.
Nope. I got a banner for that. This banner's about to happen.
Yeah, but you can do that twist.
There it is.
And we do it in the same way with our hunters, where we say this is a twist we're going to put. Because Van Helsing was not a werewolf, but in the Van Helsing movie, they do the werewolf thing. And the vampire versus the werewolf is something we could do an entire episode on, and how that ties into hunting. Because very often you see the werewolves and the other supernatural types.
Well, Van Helsing was a hodgepodge of different monsters thrown together.
Right.
I like how Underworld framed it as cats and dogs.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah,
I thought those are pretty clean delineation.
Yeah.
Underworld was a great franchise. One of my favorites.
Yeah. But it does. It breaks those things down as to, where are we going to take those? But it's got to have the familiar in there, or it's not a vampire story for me anymore.
Well, I mean, that's one of the things that we look towards when we read or consume any other type of media. Vampire lore is because it's tied to the past. There's a history there, and there's rules. And I think that's what, as human beings, we like rules and we don't like rules at the same time. Like we need a set of guidelines in how we traverse a certain universe.
Internal consistency.
Right. Yeah, you're absolutely right. So I think that's one of the things that we look towards, and I think that's what makes some vampire movies successful or books compared to others, is because they lay down the rules. If you have a free-for-all, like we just can't get into it because we're like, okay, so I'm killing this dude with copper instead of silver? Like it doesn't make sense.
Mm-hmm.
If you can kill them with anything, they're not special. And if I wanted to consume media about modern day, like contemporary, more grounded and realistic blood-sucking creatures, I just turn on C-SPAN. So you got to tie it back to history.
The members of Congress have been sucking our blood forever. I get it.
Before we go too far afield politically, because we try not to do that, people. Do you prefer?
I can agree that Congress is a bunch of bloodsuckers.
Yeah, that's it.
Anybody that watches this is going to be like, "Oh, I'm offended by that." No, I'm pretty sure they're like, "Yeah, they're right."
So, do you prefer when the vampire they're hunting is like the great old one, or do you think any vampire is okay? Because I think sometimes you see this.
I'm torn, JR. I'm going to tell you. I like the old one, and I also like the young one, the new one. He's just experiencing his power. He has no idea how powerful he is. But I also like the old one. Like, they're both very dangerous. It's like dealing with a rattlesnake. Your old rattlesnake will kind of like draw back in how much venom he's going to pump in you. That young rattlesnake is going to give you full front, and I like both those stories, to be honest with you.
My personal favorite is when they clash. And then the cool thing that I think that some people have put in is when the vampires have rules themselves. Mm-hmm. Underworld was a great example of this. There's multiple mediums where there's some responsibility. Vampire the Masquerade puts this in. You are supposed to care for your kin. You were supposed to care for if you created the mess, you have to be there to shepherd it, because new vampires are nuts. They don't know what they're doing. They don't know what the world is like for them. They don't understand why they have this hunger. And I think that is really important for your vampire story, is the relationship between the old and the new.
That gets me thinking, talking about that relationship, is if you're going to be stuck at whatever age you were bitten at, can you imagine how horrific it would be to be a preteen for all eternity?
Oh,
so that picture was of Abigail. Dear, can you please mute?
No.
That picture there was of Abigail, and that's the most recent vampire hunter movie. That
movie is so messed up.
It's so messed up. But The hunters don't know she's a vampire when they kidnap her.
Oh,
They have no clue that she is a vampire. They just think they are kidnapping a rich man's spoiled little princess daughter, and that is what they go face to face with.
And he's so ruthless. He's like,
Like,
oh my god, it's probably one of the worst vampire. Not worst as in bad, but like
it's gory. It's gory.
Such a good movie,
But it's so good. And I'm skeptical. We all know Stabby watches way too much horror movies. So when something new comes out, I'm like, oh, it's just going to be a repeat. But I really enjoyed that one. But I had that same thought process, like, man, that would really suck to be a preteen forever.
Well, what I loved about it is that it started off as a kidnapping heist movie, and then it went off the rail to become a vampire movie.
And this is one of the ones that that Nathan sent me, which was the Robert E. Howard's Solomon Kane. Have you read that one, Nathan?
Yes.
What did you think?
I have as well.
It's pretty great, but again, vampires don't really come into it. There are supernatural aspects. They mostly have to do with witch doctors.
Correct. Solomon Kane has been used because he's public use. There's been many comics about him, and they've all done a fantastic job, of dealing with the supernatural and how to combat them. Yeah.
I haven't seen a lot of the comics. Most of the ones I saw were direct adaptations of the existing stories, which is fine, and they were well done for that. I don't know how expanded the Solomon Kane, I guess, universe has become in the time since he crossed over into public domain.
Oh, it's been insane. Kind of like he's akin to like Black Terror, which was a character that was created in the 30s. Like, people take that public domain character and they take the lore and they just expand it, and it's really been really interesting because I'm the comic book guy of the group, and I enjoy the lore into which they're expanding because it's really been a treat, and it's my bank account hates me for it.
Stabby's mentioned this in the comments, but we can't talk about Vampire Hunters without Pride and Prejudice and Zombies. They had lady hunters. It's a good movie. It's not quite Vampire Hunters, but we could see the Pride and Prejudice Vampire Hunters too. You had Abe Lincoln.
I was gonna say Abraham Lincoln Vampire Hunter.
Vampire Hunter. I swapped those two in my head, but
wait a minute. 2 seconds. 2 seconds. I give credit where credit's due. I brought up the Lost Boys. Jana brought up Pride and Prejudice and Zombies.
No,
okay,
that's good.
I love.
But yeah, they did Abe Lincoln Vampire Hunter and Pride and Prejudice and Zombies, but both that idea of taking a classic, taking something that's passed into public domain, and then adding a hunter twist to it. And
okay, real talk. Are they worth watching? Because after this, I'm going to watch a movie, and I need to know if that's worth watching.
Oh, I never watched the movies. I just read the books, and they were hysterical.
Oh my lord!
The movie's even better.
So what I want to see, because now that Winnie the Pooh is in public domain, you had the Winnie the Pooh horror movie where like the blood ran
Blood and Honey. Did you watch it? It was so awesome.
Now I want to see like Winnie the Pooh Vampire Hunter. That would be hysterical.
Okay, so they made a sequel.
Winnie goes back to the old country.
That we're going to watch tonight because it's also titled Blood and Honey. And I'll let you know because it has Tigger in it now for the sequel.
All right. So was there anything else about Vampire Hunters? Because we're running along and people have to eat. I understand that's how it works for normal people. Was there anything about Vampire Hunters that we didn't talk about? Jana?
Oh, I think we hit the big ones. There's a lot of stuff that we could delve into for a very, very long time because it would be fun. The religion versus vampire aspect is something that you could write thesis papers on, and I'm sure people have. But I think we've covered the vast majority of what our dear listeners need to hear.
I'm pretty sure I qualify for a degree in this subject for online training. I think we covered it all.
Okay.
We all know you click through online training. We all know that you just click through online training.
Everyone does.
Guilty.
All right. So, what about you, Jesse? Do you have anything you think we should mention before we wrap this puppy up? Put her to bed.
We've covered it basically. I don't think we got around to like Elizabeth Bathory or Vlad the Impaler himself. Kind of the origins of some of the
that could be
vampire
another
myths.
episode.
Well, that would be a
But,
vampire episode, not necessarily a vampire hunter episode.
Yeah.
Yeah.
And I feel like that's important for real life example, but no, I think we got it. We got it pretty good.
All right. And before we wrap this puppy up, that leaves you, Mr. Nathan Abrahams.
Yes.
Do you have anything you think we should mention before we wrap it up?
No, because again, I feel like we did cover all the high points. Anything else we were to go over would probably delve into minutia. You could probably do way more episodes on vampires than you could on vampire hunters.
You get bonus points for using the word minutia.
It's a good word.
There's a lot more vampire stories out there than there are vampire hunter stories, because every vampire hunter story has a vampire. Not every vampire story has a hunter. So by necessity, there's going to be an awful lot more to talk about when you do a vampire episode than when you do a vampire hunter episode.
I'm really hoping that the genre picks up on vampire hunters. You know what I mean? Like, I'm more than willing to read a vampire hunter story, supernatural hunter story, like the Winchesters, because I'm a huge fan of Supernatural. You know, but there's a lot of vampire stories and how they work and how they operate and how they move through the world. I want to read about the guy that's trying to kill them. You know?
All right. Well, that being said, Nathan, what are you writing now?
I'm working on that Patton alt history one is the one I'm working on at the moment. That and I have another side project that I'm doing for a friend of mine. Is a Portuguese guy I play Hunt Showdown with, and I'm writing a story about Guido the Eternal Hunter.
Nice. When you get those out, you'll have to come back and talk about your solo projects. And where can listeners find you on the wild interwebs if they want to stalk you, as one does?
I mean, I would tell them to get in touch with my FBI handler, because I'm sure I have one by now. But if they can't find him, I have a Twitter. It'll probably be linked in the show notes. I have a YouTube. Again, that'll probably be linked in the show notes. I don't have I'm not a very prominent YouTuber, so the channel link is just a meaningless gibberish of letters and numbers. So I can't really read that off.
We will link all of that in the show notes. All right, Mr. Jesse James Fain, what are you writing right now?
I'm working on my debut novel titled The Serpent and the Minotaur. It is a epic fantasy that kind of plays on themes that you'll see in things like Game of Thrones and also Furies of Calderon for you Jim Butcher fans, with my own twist, of course. I'm also working on some shorts with the mentioned Monster Hunter, hopefully for a upcoming anthology. So I got some short stories coming out. I've got a main novel series coming out, and I'm going to try and get all of that out by the end of the year. You can find me if you're interested. Instagram's probably the best place. It is my full name, Jesse James Fain. I am on Twitter at Jesse James Books, and I publish free stories at Outlaw Author on Reddit. And feel free to hit me up or add me on any of those things. I'm very active, very personable, and work is very slow right now. So if you need somebody to discuss cool nerd stuff with, hit me up.
And he wants you to know that he did not shoot the sheriff. Just so we get that out.
Deputy.
Allegedly.
But he may be family, is what I'm saying.
There you go. All right, Jana. What are the many personalities of Jana S Brown, Jena Rey, and all the others that we don't talk about in polite company? What are you writing?
The interesting stuff that I'm writing, I'm bouncing between two urban fantasy projects. One of them is a continuation of a series I started several years ago, and then I battled cancer for a while and I didn't work on those. So now I'm coming back to those. And those are the Fallen series and that is about a holy warrior who lost her wings and is now in a lot of trouble and steals stuff from other people. And then I'm working on the Diana McDonough stories. Diana McDonough is my vampire hunter, supernatural slayer from New Orleans. She is possessed by a wasp spirit of war and thus can go toe-to-toe with the biggest of the baddies because she's got a rider on the back of her head. She can be found in Street Magic by Camden Park Press and Street Magic 2, which is coming out in the end of July. There's another Diana story there. And then her first debut novel, Ask Me No Questions, will come out a little bit later this year.
So this is going to be airing on at the end of July as well. So if they have a pre-order up, if you get it to me before it goes live and remind me, I will throw that in the show notes as well because it is on point. Stabby?
I have to give Jana props because I am the most anxious traveler ever. And somehow this lady not only got her whole travel weekend ready, but also sent me a goodie package in less than 24 hours from the moment we spoke about it. It showed up over the weekend and I was like, wait a minute, she's supposed to be on vacation. Why is this here?
Nice.
Because I had things to do before I left for vacation. It was on the list. It said, send Stabby a package.
All right. So this is the part where I remind you, dear listener, please be kind and speak your mind on the reviewing platforms. Your reviews help the right readers find the right books. It is very important for the algorithm, for the author, for other readers to know, hey, this is good. It's called social proof, people. There's a whole psychological workup around that concept. So do your part, people. It really does matter. Share it high, share it low. Tell everybody and your friends. All right. And with that, you can find us on our link tree at linktr.ee, linktree/Blasters and Blades podcast, where we link to all the things, the bit shoots, the rumbles, the YouTubes, the Twitters, the email, the Blasters and Blades Facebook group and Facebook page. We link to Madam Stabby Stab on the Instagram, Twitter, and the email, where you can send all the hate mail her way. We have our own, which is for professional purposes only at Blasters and Blades podcast at gmail.com. Remember, professional purposes only, people. Save the shenanigans for Stabby. She's here for it. And she might make you cry, but it's cool because we'll point and laugh with her. And with
send them to the TikTok. Just send them to the TikTok because then I can be really, really mean.
Nice. We have our website, which is a bunch of gobbledygook. Thank you, Spotify, messing up our nice, neat, simple little Anchor FM link. But on that website, you can support the show for as little as 99 cents a month. You can help keep the lights on. Or you can support the show more directly at buymeacoffee.com/author J.R. Handley. Again, buymeacoffee.com/author J.R. Handley. Be sure to put in the comment section that is for the podcast. And I will keep Madam Stabby Stab drinking all the coffee brand coffee. She will drink until it pours out of her ears. And then Nick will film it. And then we will all laugh. And if you use the code podcast grunts in the link in the comment section or in the show notes, you'll get 10% off. It's a win-win. And with that, thank you for spending some of your precious time with us. For my crazy co-host, I am J.R. Handley, and this was the Blasters and Blades podcast. We'll be back next week at the same time where we'll indulge our love of nerd culture, cheesy jokes, and all things that go boom. All right. Thank you for coming on, Jesse, Nathan. We lost Jana. Oops. Stuff happens.
The vampire got her.
Ooh.
Vampires got her.
We might need to get proof of life.
I happen to have some holy water on my writing desk.
Great. I need to build a team now.
All right. The next mission for the vampire hunting team, we will have to avenge Jana.
It's been 15 years since I've done that. So,
all right. With that, we are out. Boom. Wait for it.